What's up everybody? Today I want to go over part 2 of the color grading tutorial in Final Cut Pro 10. So if you kind of remember what we did last time, we kind of went over basic color correction, just kind of how you use the exposure, the saturation. Today I want to go more in depth of kind of how you use the LUTs and the curves and kind of just fine tune your overall image. So right now we're in Final Cut Pro. I kind of want to go over some of the clips I did in my last wedding video and kind of how I edited those. I pulled a few clips, as you can see right here. Pulled a few clips out of this wedding video that I wanted to be able to color grade for you guys and kind of just show you my process on how I color grade my wedding films. So first thing we want to do is we want to change our editing window. So this is just your basic default window you get when you're in Final Cut Pro 10. This is all you get right here. So what we want to do is we want to go up to Window up here. We want to go to Workspaces, and then we want to go to Color and Effects. Once you do that, this other window comes out. So you have your RGB parade, you have your Luma scopes, you have your vector scopes. It just gives you your full-on editing suite. So that way you don't have to keep turning things on and off. Because remember, before we have to go up here, we have to go to video scopes and all that. This, if you're just color grading, this is what I always bring up when I'm color grading my final films. It just lets me see everything, make sure the skin tones are right, make sure it's not overexposed or anything like that. So let's go to this first clip right here. This is them walking through the grass. Turn it to slow motion. By the way, if you don't know how to do slow motion, you just click on the clip, then you go over here to this time, and you do automatic speed. So I shot this clip in 4K 60, so when I click this automatic speed, it automatically fits into my 24p timeline, which I have set up right here. So I already did that, so I'm not going to do that, but that's how you guys slow down footage, if you guys didn't know that already. So right now, I can just look at this, and overall, it's pretty well exposed. You can see over here in the RGB parade, highlights are at a nice level, shadows are at a nice level. I think I can bring my blacks down a little bit. So what I do first, I come over here, I always add a LUT first. That's the very first thing I do no matter what. So once I add this LUT, I click what LUT I use. So right now I'm using the white and Revery LUTs. I found this to be awesome for this type of wedding. It's very green, it's very rich. All of their LUTs support these very foresty green areas. So what I used was Timbre 4. This is part of their LUT pack. The link will be in the description for their LUTs specifically. But right here, I always use pretty much 4. So as you can see, it does a little bit. So now we just want to fine tune some stuff here. I want to go down to the mix. I only wanted to show about 80% of the LUT. That's kind of where I always stick at. So I get this down to 80%, roughly 81%. And then I go into my actual color correction. I'll add a color board. That's the first thing I do. So exposure, maybe I'll bring that up a little bit in the highlights. I'll drop that down a little bit in the shadows. I'll bring up the midtones quite a bit so they pop more. I go to my saturation. I pretty much bump that pretty high. Do that, maybe in every area. Maybe a little bit highlights down, midtones a little bit more down. And this is where we get to the nitty gritty stuff right here. So now I want to add my curve. If you guys don't know what curves are, it's pretty much, this is the line of the video. So it's your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows. You can control every part of this by adding points all up and down the line as you go. You pretty much do this so you can know what you want in your final image. So as of right now, like I said, I want to bring down the blacks. So I'm going to make a point down here. I'm going to bring that down. Then I'm always going to bring up, not always, but this clip I want to bring up the highlights a little bit more. I want to bring up the midtones a little bit more so they kind of pop and stand out from the grass. There, so far this is what we've done with the curve, just this. See how the back trees back here get a little bit more contrasty, and same with the grass and his jacket. So overall, I really like this image right here. It's looking really good. The scopes are perfect. They're really popping out from the grass. So now what I like to do is this new hue and saturation curve. I like to do this on pretty much anything that needs a little bit more saturation. So we open this up. So as far as, I'll kind of explain the two that I use most. Hue versus hue, that kind of just changes the hue. So we grab this eye clicker, we'll click on this green right here. It'll come up here and you can change the hue of just the green. So if you wanted a little bit more warm, we'd bring it up a tiny bit. If you wanted a little bit more saturated green, you bring it down a little bit. But right now I don't really mess with the hue versus hue for this clip. What I do is hue versus saturation. So pretty much you click the eyedropper, you click the green, and then what I want to do is make the green pop more. So I'm going to bring this up. See, down we'll make it more, we'll make it less saturated. Bring it up, we'll make it more saturated. And that is too green in my opinion. So we're going to bring that down a little bit. And right there, I think that's a great looking image. So we'll go to the beginning. So this is before and this is after. Look how much that pops. Before, after, before, after. So that's kind of how I graded this clip in the film. Next, we will go to this clip right here. So this is kind of in the same area. So what I like to do is kind of a shortcut. I like to copy Command C and then paste the attributes. So it's Shift Command V to pick what attributes you want. I already did retiming, so I don't need to do that. So I want to copy all these over to this. So I want to paste it onto this clip. And overall, this looks pretty good. I think the midtones are a little bit high. So now we'll go into our curves right here. Click on curves, we'll bring the midtones down so they kind of separate away from the grass a little bit more. We'll bring the highlights down so we can bring some details back into our dress. Maybe the midtones up a tiny bit since we brought down the highlights. Remember, you guys are just looking over at these scopes. Overall, it's looking pretty good. I'm seeing the details in our dress. Maybe I want a little bit more contrast, so I'll bring that down as well. Bring this part down a little bit. Like I said, you can just keep adding points. You can add as many points as you want on this curve. If you like the flat look, remember we bring this up a tiny bit, but I'm not a big flat look person. I kind of like more contrasty. Maybe we'll bring this down a little bit so we can see more of her dress. No, it's kind of making her hand look weird, so we don't want to do that. Let's bring this up. I think I want some more contrast. There. So let's go to our exposure, our color board, and we will come to exposure and we'll bring down the shadows a little bit more. There. I think that looks good. So here's before and here's after. Before, after, all that information you're able to bring out. So just to recap from doing this from scratch, we add our LUT, turn it down to around 80%. Color board, mix it so we can get our RGB parade over here accurate. Then we bring in the curves to kind of fine tune some stuff, and then we added a saturation curve to bring out the green. Alright, so let's do this clip as well. I'll do it from scratch again. What I would do here is copy and paste from the other one, but let's just do this again so we can walk with it. Add a custom LUT always first. Want to go down. I like Timbre 4. I like bringing that down to around 80. Then I'll open up my color correction tab. I will add a color board. Right now, as you can see over here, we need to add highlights. So let's go over here. We're gonna bump that up to about right there. Now we want to bring down the shadows a little bit. We want to bump the midtones. Actually, let's bring the midtones down. Looks a little bit too overexposed. And then let's do our saturation. We usually, like I said, bump that all the way up. Add a little bit in the shadows, a little bit in the midtones, a little bit in the highlights. And then what we do, like I said before, bring up the curve. I always like to start off with a nice little contrast pull down and a little bit of a highlight boost. Right here, her dress is still good, so I don't want to mess with that too much. I think that looks pretty good right there. Then we want to add the saturation curve, bring out this green grass right here. Click the eyedropper, click the grass, and bring that up. I want to bump that a tiny bit right there. And look at that. So before, after, look at that huge color pop right there, all from just, it's just, if you guys looked at your basic grade before, it's a lot different than this, obviously, because you're able to do so much more with Luts and Curves. You're able to just give it that real film look that everyone wants in their cinematic wedding films. So that's kind of a walkthrough through that. As far as composition, guys, this is pretty good composition. She's over here in the right third of the camera. Look at how the light's hitting her from the opposite direction. Remember I said never shoot with the light, always shoot against. It gives a nice little dramatic feel. We got some shadow right here, some highlights right there. So now all we got to do is kind of make this pop a little bit more. So we want to add our custom LUT. And then we want to go down to Timbre 4. Look at how that already really popped. So let's go down to around 80. We'll bring up this color board, exposure. Let's bring that up a tiny bit. Let's bring up the mids a tiny bit so we can get some more. Bring up the shadows a tiny bit so we can see more of her face over here. That's looking pretty good so far. Let's add some saturation. Not too much because we don't want to make her skin orange. If we were all the way up here, look at that. Look at how bad that looks. So it's not like outdoor where we can kind of just boost more of the saturation. Here we want to give it a nice little settle look where she doesn't look too tan. So I think that looks good. Let's see. So that's from the color board. Now we want to go to the curves. Remember, start right here, give it a nice little shadow pull down. This, give it a nice little boost. You don't want to do it too much because you don't want to lose her details in her face on this side. So actually let's bring that down a tiny bit. Let's boost the mid-tones a tiny bit. There, look at that. It gives it a nice little just kick to it. Love it. And obviously we didn't do any saturation right here because there's nothing to really pop out of this. You want, like I said, you want to make her too orange. So I think that looks really good. So if you want to do effects, turn them off, on, off. Look at that. Here's a little pro tip for you guys as far as kind of what I do. I like to do little silhouette shots. So that's where you want to expose for the background and not for the subject. So here I wanted to expose for the background. I think I underexposed a little bit too much. So right now we're going to fix that. Add a custom LUT, like always. Timbre 4. Look at that, I already gave it a nice little pop. Bring that down to 80. So exposure, I want to bring it too high. Look at the shadows. I want to bring the shadows down because I'm not focusing on the subject. But we got to bring up the mid-tones a little bit so we can see more of the outside. Bring up the highlights a little bit more because I underexposed this pretty darn well. That's shame on me, shame on me. So let's go to the saturation. We'll bump up the saturation. Add a curve. We'll make it separate from the background even more, the subject, by doing that and adding some highlight boost. There we go. And if you want, this is not necessary, but sometimes I like to just see if I can make the trees pop back there a little bit more, which I can. So I like to keep that. Look at the trees in the back. I don't know if you can tell by me turning on and off, but I can tell on the screen that it makes a big difference. So before, after, before, after. Give it a nice little pop. These are the ones that we did outside during portrait session, and it's just beautiful. So I want to show you guys kind of how I edited this. So same process before. We'll go through this quick. Custom LUT. I always hide these LUTs. I don't know why it bugs me when it's open. Go down to Timbre 4. Want to bring this down to 80. Go in here. Exposure. We'll bring up the mid-tones. The highlights are good. Shadows, bring that down a tiny bit. Saturation, we want to boost that. Get that nice glowing sun behind her. Add a little bit, some more there. A little bit of contrast there. Well, you can see this. Slowed it down. Look at that little sun flare there. So before, after, before, after. Gives it a nice punch. Here's a cool one. This is kind of the whole landscape of Banff National Park over here. They're over here on this helicopter pad. So let's just edit this real quick. There's a little trick I want to show you guys here as well. So let's add a custom LUT. Get that down to 4. Now we're gonna add a color board. bring up the exposure more, bring down the shadows, bring up the midtones, saturation. Do that since they're outside. If you want, you can bring up, nope, not that one. The hue versus saturation. See if we can get some more out of these trees. Nice little life right there. Then we want to go to the curves. Bring down the shadows, up the highlights, just like that. Gives a nice little punch. And what I like to do here, here's the little trick I like to do. I like to add another curve and make them pop a little bit more. So what we want to do here is we want to go up to this mask. We want to add a shape mask. And I want to add it down here on them. Let's make this smaller. Let's make it more smaller than this. I'll make it kind of as small as I can, just like that. And then what I like to do with them, I like to bring up the midtones right here to just make them pop a little bit because they're kind of lost. So before, check it out over here. Before, after, before, after. It kind of separates them from the background so they're not too dark down here. It just makes your focal point know that they're there, but you're also enjoying the scenery as well. I'll leave the settings I use in the description. Also, if you're familiar with White and Revery, I'm getting those settings for the GH5. It's a natural profile, customed, like it is in the link below. Just go in there, you'll go into natural, you go down, customize each setting, and then you're pretty much good to go after that. So now let's go over some drone footage real quick. Let's add the LUT, bring this down, timbre 4, bring it down to 80-ish. Saturation, bump the saturation, exposure, let's bring the mids up a tiny bit, shadows down, saturation. And pretty much every drone footage, I like to just do a simple S curve. So I'll bring down the contrast a little bit and I'll bring up the highlights a tiny bit and maybe the mids. So just a nice little pop. So before, after, before, after. So it's pretty much the same process as that. And this is all GoPro footage. Let's do, this is of our GoPro. This is of our time in Alaska, which was awesome. I'm working on a GoPro edit that we did of this helicopter ride, and we landed on a glacier and dog sledded. So expect that in one of my next videos as a little how I end the video. It's gonna be a little 30 to 60 second video. So right here, let's add a LUT, timbre, bring that down to 80, exposure. Bring that down, bring the mids down, bring the shadows down, bring the highlights down. Saturation, bring those all the way up pretty much. Because you really want to make those mountains pop back there. Curves, bring this down. Bring that down, we'll bring the mids up a tiny bit like that. Hue versus saturation. Bring up these mountains like so. So I think the shadows are a little bit down. So let's bring the shadows up a tiny bit like that. So here's before, after, before, after. So that's a nice little pop of that image. Here's one against snow. This is when we were petting the dogs. Add a LUT. 4, bring it down to 80. Add a color board, exposure. Let's bring down the highlights a little bit. Actually, let's bring down the midtones, bring down the shadows. Saturation, we'll bring that up. Curves, bring that down. There we go. So I think that looks good. Before, after, before, after. So as you can see, it's very minor steps. It's just learning kind of how the process is. This is my process. This isn't how everyone else does it. This is just how I do it. I find it easy for me. So in review, I like to add the LUT, and then after that, I go to my color board, tweak the saturation, tweak the exposure, and then I go into the color curves and really fine tune that exposure, make the shadows where I want them, make the highlights and midtones where I want them. And then you pretty much just go off of that. You remember to set your LUT to around 70 to 80%. Some LUTs aren't done very well, so you'll have to bring that down to like 50 or 40%. in order to get the full benefit from it. So if you have that, you just got to mess with this percentage. If it's too much LUT, you just want to keep bringing it down until you have the perfect amount of LUT onto your guys' footage. So as far as order, Final Cut, we always want to have the LUT on top and our final mix underneath. So our color board and our curves underneath. And then you always want to make sure you pay attention to your scopes over here. This is more for skin tones. You kind of want to keep the skin tones on the line right here. This is pretty much the same thing as RGB Parade, but it's just your overall exposure. It doesn't really go over color at all. And this is just how I edit. I remember the workspaces. You want to go up here to Window, Workspaces, Colors and Effects, and when you're done with that, you just go back to default, and then it'll just default right back to the main thing. So yeah, this is just the second part of the color grading tutorial. I hope this was helpful. Today we went over LUTs, we went over curves, we went over hue and saturation curves, whether it be hue versus hue or hue versus saturation. It's kind of just on you guys to really practice and kind of just fine tune your guys' editing skills. And just, that's all you got to do, guys, is just practice, practice, practice. And you guys will be a good editor in no time. I'll try to do as many tips as I can in the future. This is kind of just the main process of how I color grade my films. In further episodes, I want to go over how I edit films when it comes to culling footage and getting all my selects, and I want to talk about how I put everything on the timeline and how I use audio. There's a whole bunch of different stuff I want to show you guys of what a wedding edit looks like. So just to give you guys an example of kind of how crazy and busy my wedding things look like, we'll just go here, we'll exit. So it kind of gets like this. So here's all my audio. I also have all my music and my sound effects below. I have a bunch of different clips all over the place. So I want to be able to explain this whole process to you guys on how I edit all my films. And I will be coming in step by step by step as I keep going on with this YouTube channel. I'll be doing pretty much one step each episode so I don't overwhelm you guys with a bunch of different steps. But this is kind of what it looks like. It's not as organized as some others. People like to color code things and all that. I'm still learning that process because Final Cut just introduced that not too long ago. But so we can kind of go over that together as well once I learn that. But this is just kind of how I edit my films. I always start with the soundtrack, and then I always edit based off the soundtrack. So we'll talk about that in a future episode as well. If you guys haven't yet, please go enter the giveaway. You got to subscribe to Cody's channel, subscribe to my channel to enter to win a Hawaii travel getaway. You're going to be coming with me and Cody, all expenses paid. We are going to go to Hawaii, shoot a wedding, shoot some travel stuff, and it's just going to be an awesome time and answer any guys' questions you guys may have. It's more of like a one-on-one personal basis. We also have exciting news coming up that we want to share with you guys very soon. So stay subscribed and stay updated with our channels, and more stuff will come out in the future. But that's it for this video. I hope you guys find this helpful. Until next time, I'll see you guys soon. Peace out.